Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Our today's topic is dysphagia. This dysphagia is a broad term and which is used to describe any difficulty in swallowing, and this may affect any part of the swelling pathway from the mouth to the esophagus to the lower part to the upper part of the stomach. This is a broad term, an umbrella term which usually includes all types of swelling problems, but it is important to differentiate it from other abnormalities related to swallowing, like odenophagia, which means there is painful swallowing, and this is usually related to those disorders which are associated with defects in the integrity of the epithelium of esophagus, or complete loss of swelling, which is aphasia, and which usually indicates complete obstruction of the swelling pathways. It is important to review the physiology of swallowing because this will be helpful in understanding the mechanisms and to know the mechanism by which the various disorders they are associated with dysphagia. Normally, we divide the act of swallowing into three phases: the oral phase, the pharyngeal phase, and the esophageal phase. The oral phase consists of two parts. Number one is the preparation of the bolus, where after mastication and lubrication with saliva, the food is converted into appropriate size of the bolus. And in the second phase of this oral component of the swallowing, this prepared bolus of the food is then transferred from the oral cavity into the pharynx. And then we start with the pharyngeal phase of the swallowing, which consists of a complex but well coordinated activities and movements, contraction and dilatation of various muscles and other components. And the purpose of the pharyngeal phase is, number one, is to transfer the bolus of the food from the oral cavity into the upper part of the esophagus, and at the same time one has to prevent the entry of this bolus of food into the other openings in the pharynx. So the food is prevented to enter into the nasopharynx. The food is also prevented to enter into the upper airways, and this coordinated movement, they include the backward movement of the tongue, then forward movement of the larynx, the closure of the glottis, and then the contraction of the crocopharyngeus and contraction of the other dilator muscles, the genohyoid and the other similar muscles, and then they will allow the opening of the upper esophageal sphincter, and then we start with the esophageal phase of the swallowing. The oropharyngeal phase mainly consists of muscles which are striated in structure, and their control is from the brainstem. The fifth nerve, the 7th, 9th, 10th, 11th, they are all involved in the coordinated activities and movements of the various muscles which are involved in this oropharyngeal part of the swallowing. The esophageal part is usually involuntary, and it mainly is related to the peristaltic movement, which consists of first a phase of inhibition, the so-called deglutition inhibition, and followed by a wave of contraction. And these peristaltic movements in a coordinated manner then propel the bolus of the food through the length of the esophagus, and then it is entering into the stomach by opening of the lower esophageal sphincter. So this diagram shows the various steps in the physiology of swallowing. The bolus is in the food, the bolus of the food is in the mouth, where it is properly prepared by mastication and lubrication, and both are essential. The process of lubrication is must because the bolus is then converted into semi-solid, into a more appropriate size for its onward transmission through the pharynx and through the esophagus. And then when the bolus of the food enters into the pharynx, there is backward movement of the epiglottis, and this will then close the glottis. So the airways, they are prevented from entry of the bolus of the food, and then it is propelled into the esophagus. And then the food, when it enters into the pharynx, it initiates the contraction of the cricopharyngeus, and then it also initiates the contraction of other dilator muscles like the suprahyoid muscles and geniohyoid, and then this initiates a process of peristalsis. And there are two types of peristalsis in the esophagus. Those peristalsis which are initiated by the act of swallowing, they are known as primary peristalsis. And there is a sequence of, first there is inhibition, and then this is followed by the contraction of the muscles. And anything which interferes with this deglutition inhibition will be disturbing the whole mechanism of peristalsis, and this is the underlying abnormality which we commonly see in patients of achalasia. And those peristalsis which result from the local distension of the esophagus by the presence of food, they initiate the secondary peristalsis. There is a long list of causes which can dysphagia, and for our convenience, depending upon the anatomical site, they can be classified as, number one, those causes which are pre-esophageal, like the causes which disturb the oral phase of swallowing. They are the conditions which are associated with disturbance in mastication, like trismus, the fractures of the mandible, tumors of the upper or the lower jaw, and disorders of the temporomandibular joint. Similarly, the other component of the oral phase of swallowing is the lubrication. So the problem with the swallowing resulting from the saliva secretions in the form of xerostomia or in the form of Mikulicz disease may also be associated with pre-esophageal stage of swallowing. Then the movement of the tongue, they also play a very vital role in the preparation of the bolus. So disturbances in the motility of tongue, the paralysis of tongue results from the involvement of the hypoglossal nerve, the painful ulcers on the tongue because of the herpes or because of the candidiasis, and similarly tumors and surgery of the tongue will also be disturbing the motility of the tongue and will be interfering with the oral phase of the swallowing. The movements of the soft palate, they are also essential part of the oropharyngeal part of the swallowing activity, and disturbances in the form of cleft palate or the oronasal fistula will also be associated with dysphagia. And similarly, the lesions of the buccal cavity and the floor of mouth in the form of severe stomatitis, the ulcerative lesions, and Ludwig's angina may also be associated with dysphagia. And coming to the pharyngeal phase of dysphagia, the obstructive lesions like tumors of the tonsils, of soft palate, pharynx and base of the tongue, and supraglottis region, they all will be associated with mechanotypal of dysphagia. And similarly, if the tonsils, they are very large and hypertrophic, they can also cause mechanical type of obstruction and dysphagia. The inflammatory condition in these regions in the form of acute tonsillitis, the peritonsillar abscess or quinsy, retro or parapharyngeal abscess, acute epiglottitis, and edema of the larynx, usually in the form of angioedema, can also cause swelling and mechanical obstruction of the pharynx and associated with mechanical dysphagia. Spasmodic conditions of the muscles of the pharynx resulting from tetanus and rabies will also be associated with the dysphagia. And paralytic conditions which involve the paralysis of the soft muscle resulting from diphtheria are bulbar and pseudobulbar palsy. The bulbar palsy is lower motor neuron involvement of the last four cranial nerves, whereas the pseudobulbar palsy results when there is upper motor neuron lesion of these last four cranial nerves. And because the supply of these cranial nerve is bilateral from the ipsilateral and from the contralateral corticospinal tract, so only bilateral lesion, upper motor neuron lesion of the corticospinal tract will result in the pseudobulbar palsy. The features are very similar. The patient will present with dysphagia, dysarthria, and dysphonia. But the differentiating between the bulbar and pseudobulbar palsies is on the basis of the features of upper motor neuron in the form of spastic tongue and exaggeration of jaw jerk in case of pseudobulbar palsy. And because the bulbar palsy is lower motor neuron, so the tongue will be fissured and pitted and the jaw jerk will be normal. Normally the jaw jerk cannot be demonstrated, and simple demonstration of the jaw jerk means that it is already a brisk and exaggerated reflex. And moreover, the patient with pseudobulbar palsy, they also have feature of emotional lability. So during history taking, they will show the feature of emotional lability, usually on the negative side, with frequent weeping and emotional disturbances and depressive features. And similarly, the CVAs, including the cortical, the supranuclear involvement of these cranial nerves, will also be associated with dysphagia due to involvement of these pharyngeal muscles. And coming to the esophageal causes of dysphagia, the causes may be in the lumen or in the wall or outside the wall. The luminal causes which are associated with dysphagia, they include the presence of foreign body, the congenital atresia of the esophagus, the various strictures, either because of malignancy or because of the long-standing esophageal reflux disease resulting in peptic strictures, and similarly the presence of benign and malignant tumor with mass effect will obstruct the lumen and will produce the esophageal dysphagia. The causes in the wall in the form of acute or chronic esophagitis and various types of hypomotility disorders like achalasia, like scleroderma, and like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Achalasia is a very common condition and one very common cause of dysphagia, and here we have loss of those neurons which are involved in inhibitory deglutations, and these are mainly the nitrogenic type of these neurons, because they produce nitric oxide, and when these neurons are absent, then the initial phase of deglutation inhibition of the esophagus is absent, so the whole sequence of coordinated movement and peristalsis is disturbed, and this results in dysphagia and regurgitations and other consequences of long-standing dysphagia. Scleroderma, which is now known as progressive systemic sclerosis, is progressive fibrosis of the skin and other systems, and esophageal involvement is very common, and the replacement of the muscular tissue with fibrosis results in all the coordinated movement and disturbance of the peristalsis. The amyotrophic lateral sclerosis is basically one part of the motor neuron disease. This motor neuron disease is a group of disorders which involve only the motor neurons, and the motor neuron involvement may involve both the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. So depending upon the pattern of involvement, you can have 4 different varieties of presentation of the motor neuron disease, and the most common one is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, where we have combination of both involvement of upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. So these patients commonly present with feature of upper motor neuron in the upper limbs, the upper motor neuron in the lower limbs, and the lower motor neuron feature in the upper limbs. The other presentation may be when there is predominant involvement of the upper motor neuron, and that presentation is primary lateral sclerosis. The predominant lower motor involvement is in the form of progressive muscular atrophy, and when there is involvement of the brainstem neurons, this motor neuron disease can present in the form of bulbar or pseudobulbar palsy. Another group of disorders in the esophageal wall which are associated with dysphagia, they are hypermotility disorders, and the commonest one is the spasm of the cricopharyngeal muscles. The cricopharyngeal muscle relaxes, and then it allows the opening of the upper esophageal sphincters. But when this is in spasm and it fails to relax, then it does not allow the opening of the upper esophageal sphincters, and this will result in difficulty in initiating the act of swallowing. And similarly, diffuse esophageal spasm and the nutcracker type of the esophagus, the coordinated peristaltic movements are disturbed, and that results in failure of propulsion of these bolus of food and resulting in dysphagia. And those conditions which are outside the wall, they may be in the form of hypopharyngeal diverticulum, which is also known as Zenker's diverticulum. This is arising from the posterior wall of the esophagus, posterior wall of the pharynx, hypopharynx, and just below the cricoid cartilage, and it may assume very large size. It will retain the food, and typically then it is associated with halitosis, regurgitation which is not related to swallowing, and frequent episodes of aspiration and ammonia. Hiatus hernia, where a portion of the stomach is pulled upwards through the hiatus in the diaphragm, and the sliding type of hiatus hernia are the paraesophageal. And the paraesophageal hernia, when it becomes of large size, it will cause a mass effect compression of the esophagus, lower part of the esophagus, and result in dysphagia. And similarly, the thyroid lesions, by its compressing effects, can also be associated with dysphagia. Another way of classifying the various causes of dysphagia is to divide them into two broad categories: congenital or acquired. The congenital causes, the problem will start in the early childhood or in the adult life, and the main conditions, congenital conditions which are associated with dysphagia, they include the choanal atresia, the cleft lip abnormalities and the cleft palate, then degeneration of the larynx in the form of laryngomalacia, similarly laryngeal cleft, and the tracheoesophageal fistula, and esophageal atresia, and various types of vascular rings. And these rings, sometimes the aberrant arteries, when they cross over the esophagus, they can cause compression, and this type of dysphagia, which results from these vascular abnormalities, aberrant blood vessel, is known as dysphagia lusoria. Main causes are acquired, and they may include the traumatic causes, which will include the various accidental injuries, the iatrogenic causes, blunt and penetrating trauma, head injury, and trauma resulting in damage to the cranial nerves. Then in the list of acquired causes, the infections sometimes they play a very important role in the etiology of dysphagia, and the various infections of the tonsils, the pharynx, and the peritonsillar abscess, acute supraglottitis, tuberculosis, and the neck space abscesses, they all can be associated with dysphagia. Then there is a list of inflammatory causes, and that is always to be considered, and they include the gastroesophageal reflux disease. And long-standing gastroesophageal reflux disease will be complicated with stricture formation in the lower part of the esophagus, and this will be interfering with the opening of the lower part of the esophagus and disturbing the whole anatomy of the lower esophageal sphincter, and will result in dysphagia. Then the Plummer-Vinson syndrome, which is also known as Patterson-Brown-Kelly syndrome, it results from severe deficiency of the iron. The iron is an essential component of those enzymes which are involved in the integrity of the epithelium and their replacement. the epithelial cells, they are continuously being replaced, and the new epithelial cells, they replace the old cells. And if there is severe iron deficiency anemia, then the deficient iron in those enzymes which are involved in the regeneration of epithelium and its replacement will result in epithelial changes. And typically the iron deficiency anemia is associated with these epithelial changes in the form of koilonychia, in the form of cheilitis, angular stomatitis, and in severe advanced stages you can have a web formation in the lower part of the pharynx and upper part of the esophagus, which will cause mechanical type of obstruction. And this triad of severe iron deficiency anemia with koilonychia and dysphagia due to the formation of web is known as Plummer-Vinson syndrome. Commonly it is found in females because of their repeated and regular blood loss through menstruations. They are always subjected to low levels of the iron and iron deficiency anemia. And similarly, the autoimmune disorders like progressive systemic sclerosis, systemic lupus erythematosus, rheumatoid arthritis, and sarcoidosis may also be associated with dysphagia. Then, in the list of acquired causes, those conditions which are associated with esophageal motility disorders like achalasia, like diffuse esophageal spasm, and the nutcracker type of esophagus, they can be associated with dysphagia. Similarly, the neoplastic condition sometimes may be involved in the etiology of dysphagia, and these will include the benign tumors of the oral cavity, pharynx, and esophagus, the malignant tumors of these same structures, then nasopharyngeal carcinoma, the tumors at the skull base, various blood malignancies in the form of leukemias and lymphomas with the infiltration of these structures, and enlarged mediastinal lymph nodes will also be associated with dysphagia by mechanically obstructing the lumen of these structures. Then neurological causes, they are always important, and sometimes they may be associated predominantly with dysphagias. The cerebral vascular accidents involving the cortical, supracortical structures and the nuclei in the brainstem. Similarly, isolated recurrent laryngeal nerve palsy because of the malignancy, and in this case the patient initially will only have swelling, and later on patient develop the hoarseness and laryngeal involvement. Whereas in most of the other conditions involving the oropharynx, the laryngeal symptoms are present right from the beginning. And patient with Parkinson's disease, which is extrapyramidal conditions, and due to involvement of the nigrostriatal pathways resulting in hypertonia of lead pipe or cogwheel type, and due to severe spasm of the pharyngeal muscles, the patient has difficulty in relaxing these muscles, and this will result in dysphagia. Patient with multiple sclerosis with demyelination involving the multiple neurological structures may be associated with dysphagia, and patient with myasthenia gravis where the problem is of neurotransmissions, and again difficulty in contraction of the muscles and loss of the coordinated movement of the various muscles in the oral and the pharyngeal cavity can be associated with dysphagia. Simple old age may be associated with dysphagia because of the weakness of the muscle and nerves, and this is known as presbydysphagia. And still there is a list of other causes which may be listed as miscellaneous in the form of foreign bodies, the ingestion of the caustic substances leading to strictures, the pharyngeal pouch, the feeling of a lump in the upper part of the esophagus or in the pharynx, and which is intermittent or persistent, but it does not interfere with the act of swallowing, and this is known as Glabus pharyngeus, more common in females, hysterical patients, and patients who have undergone tracheostomy, and patients with thyroid diseases. So coming to evaluation of dysphagia, and the important components, they include history, the systemic review, the physical examination, and various types of imaging studies. History is always playing a very important role in the overall evaluation and the diagnosis of the dysphagia, and one should get a detailed description of various components in the history which will be helpful in overall evaluations. Like age of the patient is important. In young age, mostly it will be the congenital disorders, and in the old age it may be the inflammations or infections or malignancies which may be responsible for dysphagia. The onset, whether this is gradual or sudden, will also be helpful in the overall evaluations. And again, what is the duration of this dysphagia is also important. And one important aspect is to ask from the patient the level of sensation of dysphagia, because most of the time the obstruction or the cause is at the site where the patient is pointing out, or it may be below that level. Then the type of food which is associated with the dysphagia is also important. The mechanical dysphagia, which results from the obstruction of these food passages and does not allow the normal size of the bolus to pass through these narrow passages, will be mainly associated initially with the solid foods, and as the disease progresses and the lumen becomes more and more narrow, then the liquid will also be involved. On the other hand, the motor dysphagia, which results from the motility problem, it affects mainly the solids and liquids equally, but problem will be more with the liquids as compared to the solids. Then weight loss will be associated with long-standing dysphagia, but if it is out of proportion to the degree of dysphagia, it may indicate underlying malignancies. History of injection of caustic substances and then resulting in a stricture will be helpful in evaluations, and similarly any previous surgery or trauma will also be helpful. Then in the history, the association with other symptoms is also helpful in evaluations, like the presence of adenophagia, which is painful swelling, and this indicates that there is mucosal injury. This may result from trauma, from infection, or from inflammations. But ultimately, patient is able to complete the act of swallowing, and this indicates usually the problem in the esophagus. Regurgitation of food, if it is associated with the heartburn and after the meals, this is one very important feature of gastroesophageal reflux disease. But if the patient is having regurgitations which is not associated with swallowing and is also associated with halitosis, this most likely indicates the presence of a Zenkus diverticulum. The hoarseness is usually a feature of oropharyngeal type of dysphagia and indicates involvement of the laryngeal muscles because they have a common innervation with the pharyngeal structures. And similarly, the rhaphidotalgia may also be important. And if the patient complains of coughing after eating, or patient is having recurrent chest infections, this indicates most likely problem with the oropharyngeal phase of the dysphagia, because there is incomplete closure or defective closure of the various openings in the pharynx. So the food will be drooling out into the mouth. It will be going wrong direction into the nasopharynx with regurgitation into the nose, or it may enter into the larynx and the airways, resulting in aspiration. So the presence of cough and the recurrent episodes of aspiration and pneumonia indicates most likely problem with the oropharyngeal stage of dysphagia. And the systemic review is also very helpful, and it provides very useful information in the overall evaluation of patient with dysphagia. The history of tobacco and alcohol intake, which may be associated with acid peptic disease or with the esophagitis, and then the intake of medication is important, because these medications may also be associated with other dysphagia through different mechanisms, like antihistamines, the anticholinergic, which interfere with the secretion of the saliva, the antidepressants and antihypertensive may also be involved, the osteoarthritis with the formation of those osteophytes, and if these are anterior osteophyte in the cervical regions and they are of large size, they can cause compression of the esophagus from the outside. Systemic neuromuscular disorders like myasthenia gravis, like progressive systemic sclerosis, they are common associations. Various autoimmune disorders like the SLEs, rheumatoid arthritis, and similarly this psychiatric state is also to be assessed. And this is a simple algorithm how to evaluate a patient who presents with the difficulty in swallowing or dysphagia. So the first step when a patient presents with difficulty in swallowing is to ask the patient what does it feel like, and patient will be answering that food sticks during the meals, or patient will say that he feels a lump in the throat between the meals, or these two conditions. So if the patient is complaining of a feeling of lump in the throat in between the meals, but the swelling is otherwise not affected, then most likely this is globus, and one has to assess the psychiatric patient should be subjected for psychiatric evaluations for the underlying abnormality. And if the main complaint of the patient is that food is sticking during the meals, then the next question is, where does it stick? Where does it stick? It will be in the neck or in the retrosternum. And if the patient is pointing towards the retrosternal region, okay, here he or she feels obstruction, that indicates involvement of esophagus. But if the patient is saying that he feels that the food is being obstructed in the neck, then the problem may be either with the pharynx or with the esophagus. And then one has to go for the other associated features, like the features of regurgitation, the patient with associated cough, and patient with repeated swallowing. They indicate that problem is in the pharynx. And if these associated symptoms are not there, then the problem is in the esophagus. So in this simple way, we can to some extent assess the possible anatomical site of the abnormality which is causing dysphagia. And once we know that most likely the cause is in the esophagus, and this is the algorithm, then how to go for further evaluations. We have to ask the patient whether dysphagia is for the solids or liquids, and if the patient says that it is only for the solids, then most likely this is a structural problem which is leading to dysphagia, and this is basically a mechanical type of dysphagia. And the further questioning is whether the problem of dysphagia is intermittent and non-progressive, or it is progressive. If it is intermittent and non-progressive, then most likely it indicates the presence of ring or web. The Zenker's diverticulum, various types of web, like the web which is seen in patient with Plummer-Vinson syndrome or Chizarsky's ring, and other type of abnormalities may be considered. And if the patient says that the problem of dysphagia is progressive and it is gradually worsening, then one has to ask whether the progression is slow and patient is also having associated reflex symptoms. And if the answer is yes, then most likely it is the underlying reflex disease with associated peptic stricture, which is causing this progressive type of dysphagia, mainly for the solids. And if the progression is rapid and patient is also having significant and out of proportion weight loss, then most likely underlying malignancy is maybe the underlying cause. And if on the initial evaluation patient says that dysphagia is both for the solids and liquids, then probably this is a motility disorders, something related to the movement of the muscles which is causing this dysphagia. And the next question is to ask the patient about the chest pain and regurgitations. If the patient says that he is having more feature of regurgitation and less pain, then this points towards underlying achalasia. But if the pain is more and regurgitation is less or absent, this indicates motility disorders in the form of diffuse esophageal spasm. So coming to the examination part of view as a part of evaluation, the general physical examination, one has to look for the weight loss, the nutrition status of the patients, pallor and koilonychia. The two features will be associated with the Plummer-Vinson syndrome and iron deficiency anemia leading to epithelial changes and formation of web. Then jaundice, indicating most likely involvement of the lymph nodes, malignancies, and any problem with the quality of the voice, because the laryngeal involvement will be associated with hoarseness, and similarly this condition will be also pointing towards the bulbar or pseudobulbar palsy. The examination of oral cavity will be helpful to find out if the mouth opening is proper or inadequate. What about the tongue movements, whether they are normal or abnormal, and similarly the presence of gag reflex will indicate involvement of the cranial nerves, last four cranial nerves which are involved in the movement of the tongue and in the gag reflex. Then indirect laryngoscopy, nasolaryngoscopy will be helpful in evaluation of dysphagia when it will demonstrate the pooling of secretions, any visible growth, and the status of the vocal cords. Examination of the neck for the lymph nodes, any other mass, laryngeal cavities, and the examination for integrity of the laryngeal cartilage will be helpful. Then coming to investigations, the routine blood test will be helpful. The fluid blood count with ESR and C-reactive proteins. Similarly, liver function test, renal function test, serum electrolytes and thyroid function test will be helpful in pointing out towards individual abnormalities. The imaging studies, they are very helpful in overall evaluation of these patients with dysphasias. Simple X-rays, barium swallows, CT scan, MRI, and then fiber-optic endoscopic evaluation of the swallowing, video fluoroscopic studies, the barometry to indicate the presence of the pressure at various levels of the food passage, and then 24-hour ambulatory esophageal pH monitoring may also be helpful, especially in the evaluation of reflux disease. The X-rays, they are mainly helpful to demonstrate the presence of suspected infectious causes of dysphagia when they will be indicating the gross displacement of structures, and similarly the presence of foreign bodies will also be detected on these plain X-rays. Barium swallow is usually very helpful in the evaluation of structural disorders like pharyngeal pouch, the presence of stricture, hiatus hernia, or an obstructive esophageal lesions. And we can also use double contrast barium with air for more detailed evaluation of these abnormalities. And these two x-rays, the x-ray on the left side, barium swelling on the left side, indicates the presence of narrowing in the lower part of the esophagus, which is like the bird beak, and the proximal part of the esophagus is hugely dilated, giving a sigmoid type of appearance, and this is the appearance which we see in patients with achalasia. And on the right side we have the appearance which we see in diffuse esophageal spasm, a corkscrew type of the appearance on the barium swallow. The CT scans, they are usually helpful in the diagnosis and in the localization of the malignancies, and if we are suspecting malignancy, then CT scan of the neck, chest and abdomen, they are also useful in staging the disease. The MRIs, they are helpful when dysphagia is suspected to be caused by multiple sclerosis or by the cerebral tumors, or when we are suspecting the intracranial extension of the nasopharyngeal carcinomas. Very useful investigation is the video fluoroscopic examination of the act of swallowing. The oropharyngeal phase of the swallowing, it hardly takes 1 second. So the videoscopic examination of this whole sequence of the movements in the oropharyngeal region will be helpful in exactly pointing out the underlying abnormalities. So this investigation is very helpful and is an excellent tool to evaluate the dynamic swallowing disorders. Then fiber optic endoscopic evaluation of the swallowing. This is again very helpful in demonstrating the pooling in hypopharynx, the presence of reduced or absent endolaryngeal sensations, and aspiration can also be detected. The manometry with the help of the various sensors will detect the pressure at the different levels, and then we can detect the abnormalities which are associated with these motility problems, like patient with achalasia, patient with scleroderma, patient with diffuse esophageal spasm. They can also have abnormal pressure patterns, and this manometric assessment is then helpful in exactly the underlying cause which is causing these motility disorder. Direct finger-scopy will be helpful, and especially use of rigid endoscopes to visualize and biopsy the upper esophagus and pharynx. This may also be used to remove the foreign bodies in the region, and this is the most reliable way of examining the post-cricoid area. And 24-hour pH monitoring, either with the help of the transnasal catheter or with the help of a wireless capsules, is very helpful in demonstrating the presence or absence of the reflux, and this is usually done when the patient presents with atypical symptom of reflux, or patient is not showing response to the empirical treatment, or if the patient is planned for surgery. So then 24-hour evaluation of the pH in the esophagus is very important. Normal pH is between 5 to 7, and the time duration during which the pH falls less than 4 indicates the presence of acid reflux. And this pH monitoring can also be associated with impedance monitoring, which will be differentiating between the fluid and between the air reflex. So the diagrams about the various disorders which are associated with dysphagia, and this is the common presentation, how the patient says he is feeling something obstructing in the neck. This X-ray shows the presence of a foreign body, and basically this child has swallowed a disc battery, and on the lateral view we can see the double edge, and on the frontal view we can see the double circle, and this is the typical appearance of a foreign body in the form of disc battery, which is obstructing the upper part of the esophagus. The tracheostomy, by number of mechanisms, mechanical and associated obstructive lesions in this area, is commonly associated with dysphagia. Zenker's diverticulum arising from the posterior wall of the hypopharynx because of the natural weakness in these regions, and then it can assume very large size, and then it can compress the esophagus from outside, and because the food is stored in this diverticulum for a long time, so this is associated with halitosis, and then food is regurgitated from this pouch into the food passages, and this regurgitation is independent of swallowing, and this results in frequent episodes of aspiration and pneumonias. And we can demonstrate the presence of this Zenker diverticulum on barium swallow. And well advanced cervical spondylosis with large anterior osteophytes which compress the posterior part of the esophagus and significantly narrow the lumen can be demonstrated on the X-rays and sometimes on the MRIs. Then the presence of various webs and rings can also be seen on the endoscopic examination. The barium swallows, which indicates the presence of strictures, large irregular narrowing in the lower part of the esophagus are in the middle part of the esophagus, whereas this peptic stricture has to be differentiated from the barium swallow appearance of achalasia, where the smooth narrowing in the lower part of the esophagus in the form of a bulb weak, and the proximal part is hugely dilated. The presence of the esophageal carcinoma can be seen on endoscopy and can be biopsied, and the exact nature of this carcinoma then can be evaluated. So just to again summarize the various systemic disorders which can cause dysphagia, one has to look for the presence of stroke, the presence of motor neuron disease, the Parkinson disease, multiple sclerosis, various types of myopathies and muscular dystrophies, and neuromuscular disorders in the form of myasthenia gravis or Eaton-Lambert syndrome. Then the presence of autoimmune disorders has to be considered: progressive systemic sclerosis, SLE, dermatomyositis, and mixed connective tissue disease, overlap syndromes, various types of the mucosal and cutaneous abnormalities, the Zika syndrome which interfere with the secretion of saliva, and the rheumatoid arthritis with involvement of the cricoretinoid joint. And management is according to the diagnosis. Two types of strategies they are usually used in the management of these patients. One is the compensatory, and these compensatory strategies, they are not aimed at changing the overall physiology of swelling, whereas the second strategy is rehabilitative, where we aim at changing the swelling physiologies. So this is the various techniques which we used in the compensatory strategies, where we just want to facilitate the process of swallowing, and which we are not aiming to change the underlying physiology of swallowing. And various techniques, one has to educate the patient about the postures which will be helpful in facilitating the swallowing. Head should be back, chin should be down, and then head rotations, lying down on one side, head tilting, head rotations, and similarly so many other modalities in these compensatory strategies. So thank you very much.